They weren't born a powerhouse, they built one from dust. Rome began as a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber, only to forge an empire that bent continents, rewrote law, and shaped the Western world. This is not just history. It's the origin story of power itself.
Let's go back to 753 BCE, central Italy. If you were standing on the 7 hills overlooking the Tiber River, you'd see nothing that screams future world power. Just marshland, small farming communities, and tribes constantly fighting over scraps of territory. According to legend, Rome's foundation story involves twin brothers raised by a wolf fratricide and the kidnapping of women from neighboring tribes. Romulus kills his brother Remus, names the city after himself, and when there aren't enough women to populate his new city, he orchestrates the infamous rape of the Sabine women, essentially abducting women from surrounding communities. Not exactly the origin story you'd expect for Western civilization's greatest empire, right? But here's where it gets interesting. Whether you believe the legend or not, the archaeological evidence tells us something remarkable. Rome actually began as a refuge, a place where outcasts, criminals, refugees, and runaway slaves could start fresh. This wasn't a homogeneous society of elites, it was a melting pot from day one. And that difference? That would become Rome's secret weapon. For its first 2.5 centuries, Rome wasn't even an empire, it was a kingdom. 7 kings ruled Rome. And here's a fact that might surprise you. Several of them weren't even Roman. They were Etruscan, from the sophisticated civilization to the north. These foreign kings brought engineering, urban planning, and architectural knowledge that transformed Rome from a collection of huts into an actual city. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer system, was built during this period. Think about that. While most settlements were literally living in their own waste, Rome was already thinking about infrastructure and public health. But in 509 BCE, everything changed. The last king, Tarquin the Proud, became such a tyrant that the Romans said, never again. They didn't just remove their king, they invented a completely new system of government. They created the Roman Republic. Here's the revolutionary part. Instead of one ruler, they'd have 2 consuls who served only 1 year and could veto each other. A senate of experienced leaders would advise them, and assemblies of citizens would vote on major decisions. They'd built in checks and balances to prevent any single person from gaining absolute power. Sound familiar? The founding fathers of America studied Roman Republican government extensively when designing the US Constitution. Our Senate, our system of vetoes, our very concept of civic duty, it all traces back to this moment in 509 BCE. But the Romans had a problem. They'd just made themselves a target. Imagine you're a neighboring kingdom in 500 BCE Italy. You just heard that Rome kicked out its king and is now governed by committees, citizens voting, 2 leaders who can cancel each other out. You'd think they were crazy. You'd think they were weak. You'd think it was time to attack. And that's exactly what happened. For the next 250 years, Rome fought for its survival against everyone around them. The Etruscans wanted their territory back. The Samnites controlled the fertile mountains. The Latin tribes saw opportunity. The Gauls swept down from the north and actually sacked Rome in 390 BCE, burning it to the ground. But here's where Rome did something that no other ancient civilization had ever done consistently. When they won a war, they didn't just conquer, they assimilated. Think about how empire building usually worked in the ancient world. Persia conquered and ruled with an iron fist. Sparta dominated through fear. Athens built an empire of tribute-paying subjects. The pattern was simple: win, dominate, extract resources, repeat. Rome broke the pattern. When Rome defeated a neighboring Italian city, they offered something unprecedented: a path to Roman citizenship. Not immediately and not without conditions, but the path existed. Defeated enemies could become partners. Their soldiers could fight in Roman legions. Their gods could join the Roman pantheon. Their customs could blend with Roman culture. It was brilliant, ruthlessly brilliant. Because when the next war came, and it always came, those former enemies would fight alongside Rome. Every victory expanded Rome's manpower pool. Every conquered territory added soldiers, resources, and strategic depth. By 264 BCE, Rome controlled all of Italy, but they were about to face their greatest test yet. Across the Mediterranean, another superpower was watching Rome's expansion with growing concern. Carthage, a wealthy maritime empire based in North Africa, controlled trade routes across the Mediterranean, had colonies in Spain, Sicily, and Sardinia, and possessed the most powerful navy the world had ever seen. Rome, by contrast, barely had a navy at all. When conflict erupted over Sicily in 264 BCE, nobody expected Rome to stand a chance at sea. The First Punic War had begun, and Rome was playing a game they didn't know the rules to. So they did something crazy. They copied their enemies' ships. When a Carthaginian warship ran aground on the Italian coast, the Romans examined it, reverse-engineered it, and built 120 copies in just 60 days. But they knew they couldn't outsail Carthage. Their crews had no experience. So they invented a new device called the corvus, a boarding bridge with a spike that would slam down onto enemy ships, allowing Roman soldiers to storm across and fight hand to hand. They turned naval warfare into land warfare. It worked. Against all odds, Rome won the First Punic War in 241 BCE, but the cost was staggering. Hundreds of ships lost, tens of thousands dead. And Carthage wasn't finished. 23 years later, Carthage struck back, and this time they brought a weapon Rome had never faced before. His name was Hannibal Barca. If you ask historians to name the greatest military commander who ever lived, Alexander the Great usually gets mentioned. Napoleon Bonaparte, Julius Caesar, Genghis Khan. But Hannibal terrified Rome more than any enemy before or since. In 218 BCE, Hannibal did the impossible. Instead of attacking Rome by sea where they expected him, he marched an army, including 37 war elephants from Spain across the Pyrenees, through Gaul, and over the Alps in winter. People thought it couldn't be done. Hannibal did it anyway. When he descended into Italy, the Romans sent an army to stop him. Hannibal destroyed them at the Battle of Trebia. They sent another army. Hannibal ambushed them at Lake Trasimene, killing 15,000 Romans in a single morning. Then came Cannae, August 2nd, 216 BCE. The largest army Rome had ever assembled, 86,000 men, faced Hannibal's force of 50,000 on the plains of Cannae. The Romans were confident. They had superior numbers. They had the might of the Republic behind them. What happened next became the most studied military disaster in history. Hannibal deliberately weakened his center, letting the Romans push forward while his cavalry swept around the flanks. Then he closed the trap. The Romans found themselves surrounded on all sides, crushed together so tightly they couldn't even raise their weapons. By sunset, 50,000 to 70,000 Romans lay dead. It was the worst single-day defeat any Roman army would ever suffer. Hannibal had annihilated Rome's military in a single afternoon. Here's the question nobody could answer at the time. Why didn't Hannibal march on Rome itself? His cavalry commander Maharbal supposedly said, "You know how to win a battle, Hannibal, but you do not know how to use your victory." Hannibal chose instead to wait, hoping Rome's Italian allies would defect. It was a miscalculation that would cost Carthage everything. Because Rome did something that shocked the ancient world, they refused to surrender. Any other civilization would have sued for peace after losing 3 armies and 100,000 men. But the Senate forbade even speaking the word peace. They freed slaves to fight. They armed boys too young for service. They built new legions from scratch. The Romans had a saying, "Vincit qui patitur," he conquers who endures. For 13 years, Hannibal ravaged Italy while Rome slowly rebuilt. They avoided direct battle. They cut his supply lines. They attacked Carthaginian territories in Spain and Africa. And finally, they produced their own strategic genius, Scipio Africanus. In 202 BCE, at the Battle of Zama in North Africa, Scipio defeated Hannibal using his own tactics against him. The Second Punic War was over. Carthage was finished as a world power. Rome had survived its darkest hour. But something had changed. The republic that emerged from the Punic Wars was harder, more ruthless, more willing to use overwhelming force. In 146 BCE, when Carthage showed signs of recovery, Rome returned, destroyed the city completely, and, according to legend, salted the earth so nothing would ever grow there again. The message was clear: Rome doesn't lose, and Rome doesn't forgive. By 100 BCE, Rome wasn't just a regional power. It dominated the entire Mediterranean. Greece had fallen, Spain was conquered, North Africa was Roman, Egypt would soon follow. The Republic controlled an empire stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the Sahara. They called it Mare Nostrum, our sea. The Mediterranean was now a Roman lake. But success created problems Rome's founders never anticipated. The soldiers who conquered this empire spent decades away from home. When they returned to Italy, they found their farms had been bought up by wealthy senators who turned them into massive estates, worked by slaves, prisoners from Rome's endless wars. The citizen farmer, the backbone of the early republic, was disappearing. Meanwhile, the wealth flooding into Rome created a new class of super-rich senators who built marble palaces while common citizens struggled to survive. The Republic's careful balance of power was straining under the weight of its own success. In 133 BCE, a young tribune named Tiberius Gracchus proposed radical land reform, redistributing public land to poor citizens. The Senate saw this as a threat to their wealth and power. They didn't debate him, they didn't negotiate. They murdered him in broad daylight. A sitting Roman official, killed by fellow senators on the streets of Rome. That hadn't happened in 400 years of Republican government. But it would keep happening. Tiberius's brother Gaius tried to continue the reforms a decade later. He was also killed, along with 3,000 of his supporters. The Roman Republic had begun solving political disagreements with violence, and once that door opened, it never closed. Enter the generals. As Rome's empire expanded, its armies grew more loyal to their commanders than to the Republic itself. Why? Because the Senate wouldn't provide land or pensions for retired soldiers. But successful generals could. They'd reward their legions with plunder, land, and riches from conquered territories. Suddenly, Rome had armies that were personal forces, not state forces. In 88 BCE, a general named Sulla did the unthinkable. He marched his legions on Rome itself to seize power. Roman soldiers attacking Rome. It was sacrilege. It was treason. It was the future. For the next 50 years, Rome tore itself apart in civil wars. Generals fought generals, armies battled armies. The republic that had survived Hannibal was destroying itself from within. Then came three men who would change everything: Pompey the Great, Marcus Licinius Crassus, and a brilliant young general named Gaius Julius Caesar. In 60 BCE, they formed an unofficial alliance called the First Triumvirate, a backroom deal to split power among themselves. Caesar got a military command in Gaul. Crassus got an eastern campaign. Pompey secured political control in Rome. But here's the thing about power-sharing arrangements. They only work until someone wants it all. Crassus died in 53 BCE, stupidly invading Parthia in search of military glory. That left Caesar and Pompey. The Senate, terrified of Caesar's growing power and his fiercely loyal legions, sided with Pompey. They ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome, alone and defenseless. Caesar faced an impossible choice: obey and be destroyed by his enemies in the Senate, or commit treason and start a civil war that would kill tens of thousands of Romans. On January 10th, 49 BCE, Caesar stood at the Rubicon River, the boundary between Gaul and Italy. By law, no general could cross it with an army. Caesar looked at his officers and spoke the words that would echo through history. Alea iacta est. The die is cast. He crossed. The Republic died that day, though it would take a few more years to finish dying. Caesar defeated Pompey. He became dictator. He reformed the calendar, expanded the Senate, launched massive building projects, and started redistributing land to veterans. Some called him a tyrant. Others saw him as the only man who could save Rome from chaos. On March 15th, 44 BCE, the Ides of March, the Senate answered that question. Led by Brutus and Cassius, a group of senators stabbed Caesar 23 times at the foot of Pompey's statue. They thought they were saving the Republic. They were just creating a bigger power vacuum. More civil wars followed. Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian, emerged victorious in 31 BCE after defeating Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. He returned to Rome with absolute power, but he was smarter than Caesar. He didn't call himself king or dictator. He called himself princeps, first citizen. He kept all the old republican offices functioning. The Senate still met, consuls were still elected, but everyone knew who really held power. In 27 BCE, the Senate gave him a new title, Augustus, the revered one. The Roman Republic was over. The Roman Empire had begun. What Augustus created over the next 40 years was extraordinary. He transformed Rome from a city of brick into a city of marble. He established professional armies stationed at the borders. He created an efficient bureaucracy. He built roads that connected every corner of the empire. He secured the frontiers from Britain to Egypt. Most importantly, he gave Rome something it hadn't had in a century: peace. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, would last for over 200 years. And during that time, the Mediterranean world experienced prosperity unlike anything before it. Think about what this meant practically. A merchant in Alexandria could ship goods to London without crossing a single hostile border. A scholar in Athens could travel to study in Rome without fear of bandits or war. A common citizen in Spain lived under the same laws as someone in Syria. The empire's population reached 70 million people, a quarter of the world's population at the time. Cities flourished, trade boomed, engineering marvels rose across the empire, aqueducts that still carry water, amphitheaters that still stand, roads still buried beneath modern highways. The Colosseum seated 50,000 people and had better crowd management systems than most modern stadiums. The Pantheon's concrete dome remained the world's largest for 1,400 years. Roman concrete was so advanced we've only recently rediscovered how to replicate it. But Rome's greatest export wasn't architecture or engineering, it was law. Roman law established concepts we take for granted today: innocent until proven guilty, the right to face your accuser. The burden of proof lies with the prosecution. Written contracts are binding. Property rights are protected. These weren't just rules for Romans. They applied throughout the empire. A citizen in Damascus had the same legal rights as one in Rome. When the Apostle Paul was arrested in Jerusalem around 60 CE, he invoked his right as a Roman citizen to appeal to Caesar himself, and they had to honor it. Legal systems in Britain, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Romania, and most of Latin America still trace their foundations to Roman law. When American lawyers argue in court, they're often using Latin legal terms created 2,000 years ago. The empire also became a cultural melting pot. Greek philosophy merged with Roman pragmatism. Eastern religions spread west. Mystery cults from Egypt and Persia gained followers. Judaism had communities throughout the empire. And from one small sect in Judea, Christianity would eventually transform Rome entirely. Under emperors like Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius in the 2nd century CE, the empire reached its greatest extent: 5 million square kilometers from the Atlantic to the Persian Gulf. Hadrian built his famous wall across Britain. The frontiers seemed secure. Rome seemed eternal. but cracks were forming beneath the surface. Here's what nobody wants to admit about the fall of Rome. It didn't happen in a day, a year, or even a century. Rome died slowly, gradually, over nearly 300 years. And the causes weren't simple. Let's start with a problem that sounds almost modern: inflation. To pay for armies, bureaucracy, and endless building projects, emperors started debasing the currency, reducing the silver content in coins and replacing it with cheaper metals. A denarius in 200 CE might be 50% silver. By 270 CE, it was less than 5%. Prices skyrocketed. Savings became worthless. The middle class collapsed. Sound familiar? Then there was the succession crisis. Augustus had established a system where emperors adopted and trained their successors. But after Marcus Aurelius died in 180 CE, he broke tradition and left the empire to his biological son, Commodus, a narcissistic megalomaniac who fought as a gladiator and declared himself the reincarnation of Hercules. It went downhill from there. Between 235 and 284 CE, just 50 years, Rome had 26 legitimate emperors and countless usurpers. The average reign was less than 2 years. Most died violently. Generals declared themselves emperor and fought each other while the frontiers collapsed. This period, known as the crisis of the 3rd century, nearly destroyed everything. Meanwhile, the threats on the borders were changing. For centuries, Rome had fought disorganized barbarian tribes. But by the 3rd and 4th centuries, these tribes were confederating, learning Roman military tactics, and becoming dangerous. The Goths, Vandals, Franks, and Alemanni weren't random raiders anymore. They were migrating nations pushed west by even more fearsome peoples coming from Central Asia. The Persian Sassanid Empire to the east had also grown strong, repeatedly invading Roman territory. In 260 CE, they did the unthinkable. They captured a Roman emperor, Valerian, in battle. He spent the rest of his life as a prisoner, allegedly used as a footstool by the Persian king. The emperor of Rome reduced to furniture. The symbolism was devastating. Diocletian, who seized power in 284 CE, attempted radical reforms. He split the empire into east and west, each with its own emperor and junior emperor, 4 rulers total. He fixed prices by decree. He made professions hereditary, forcing sons to follow their fathers' occupations. He launched the last great persecution of Christians. It slowed the decline, but didn't stop it. Then came Constantine. In 312 CE, Constantine won a civil war and reunited the empire. But he made 2 decisions that would reshape history. First, he legalized Christianity and then actively promoted it. Within a generation, the empire that had fed Christians to lions would become officially Christian. Second, he moved the capital. Rome, that ancient city on the Tiber, was no longer the center of power. Constantine built a new Rome on the site of the Greek city Byzantium, strategically positioned between Europe and Asia. He renamed it Constantinople, Constantine's city. Today we call it Istanbul. The old Rome would never be the empire's true heart again. The Western Roman Empire limped through the 4th century. Emperors were increasingly puppets controlled by Germanic generals. The economy stagnated, cities shrank, tax collection collapsed. The legions, once filled with citizen soldiers, now consisted mainly of Germanic mercenaries with no loyalty to Rome. In 376 CE, a Gothic tribe fleeing the Huns begged to cross the Danube and settle in Roman territory. Rome agreed, but treated them so poorly that they revolted. At the Battle of Adrianople in 378 CE, they destroyed a Roman army and killed the Emperor Valens. For the first time in 600 years, a Roman emperor died in battle against barbarians. The empire was hemorrhaging. Taxes couldn't be collected. Roads fell into disrepair. Aqueducts crumbled. The magnificent infrastructure that had connected the empire became too expensive to maintain. In 410 CE, Visigoths under Alaric sacked Rome itself. The city that hadn't fallen to a foreign enemy in 800 years was pillaged for 3 days. The psychological impact was enormous. If Rome could fall, anything could fall. Saint Jerome, living in Bethlehem, wrote, "The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken, but Rome's Western Empire survived even that. For a few more decades, puppet emperors ruled from Ravenna, while Germanic strongmen held real power. The title Emperor of Rome still existed, even if it meant almost nothing. Then, on September 4th, 476 CE, a Germanic general named Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, a teenager ironically named Romulus Augustulus, combining the names of Rome's founder and its first emperor. Odoacer didn't bother declaring himself emperor. He simply sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople and told them there was no need for a Western emperor anymore. And just like that, after 1,229 years, the Western Roman Empire ceased to exist. If this journey through the rise, glory, and legacy of the Roman Empire pulled you in, don't let it stop here. Hit that like button to support Deep Dive History, drop a comment with the next empire or era you want explored, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss the stories that built our world.